Greetings, this is Amy Wentley with Chai Knuckles Knitting, and this is episode 2022-5, the Polarized Hat, Swatch with two-color stranded knitting. I am teaching a class on the Polarized Hat, which is a pattern by Tanis Gray. This is the hat here. It's a lovely toque, and it starts out with a 2x2 two-color ribbing here at the bottom. It has two Latvian braids. And in the middle of those two Latvian braids is some two-color stranded knitting called a Fair Isle pattern in the pattern. It's beautiful, and then it ends with a solid color at the top. We are going to, this is the first of two videos. This one is covering how to knit a gauge swatch and how to do two-color stranded knitting. The reason that we want to do a gauge swatch is we want to make sure that this hat ends up being the right size. It's especially important for my class because we chose a yarn that's a little heavier than what the pattern calls for. The pattern calls for a heavy worsted weight yarn, and for our class we chose an Aran weight yarn. And so we're going to have to see how our gauge compares to the pattern gauge to see if we need to make any modification in how many stitches we cast on so that we get the right size hat. So we're going to work on a swatch, and the swatch looks like this, and this is upside down. There you go. And so we're going to use our 16-inch needle, and we're going to cast on a multiple of 8 stitches because this Fair Isle pattern is a repeat of 8 stitches. And so I am going to start out by casting on 56 stitches onto my 16-inch circular needle. Tail cast on or a knitted cast on, you want to make sure it is very elastic, that it stretches. You don't want a tight cast on. So I'm going to pause the recording for a bit and be right back. I'm going to cast on my 56 stitches, and then I will explain how to do two-color stranded knitting. Be right back. I'm back. So I cast on 54 stitches on my 16-inch circular needles, and you may need to cast on more or less depending on how heavy or light your yarn is. So as I said, mine's a heavy worsted Aran weight yarn, and I could fit 54 stitches on the needle here so that I'm going to be able to bring it around and join it to work this in the round. If your stitches are stretched really tightly and it's very difficult for you to get the stitches up and to join them in the round like this, you'll want to cast on 8 more stitches. So for you, that would be 64 stitches instead of 56. So remember, they have to be multiples of 8 stitches. So I am now going to join to work in the round. But before I do, I would like to talk to you about the chart in the pattern that we are going to follow for the Fair Isle or color work portion of our hat. So this is the chart that we are going to use. And let me go ahead and make this a little bigger for you. Maybe back off just a little bit. There we go. So this is the chart, and this is the pattern we are going to be knitting. And if you look at the chart and the pattern next to one another, you can see how they kind of look like each other. That's the idea of the chart, is that it shows you what the front side of your knitted work is going to look like, and you're going to follow this chart. So each one of the squares on this chart represents one knit stitch, and the dark ones are the main color, and those are knit stitches. And the white ones are the contrasting color, and they are also knit stitches. So on my swatch here, my main color is this is actually a dark purple, and my contrasting color is a gray. So just get familiar with that. Main color is essentially your background color. It's the color between these diamonds, and the contrasting color is the diamonds and the stripes. Okay, we're going to follow this chart once we get going. So I'm going to move this up a little bit. One thing I want to mention too is that when you read this chart, you start at round 1 and you knit these 8 stitches, and then you repeat them again and again and again until you come to the end of the round. So I will actually repeat these 8 stitches 7 times for a total of 57 stitches. After I finish those 56 stitches. 8 times 7, 56. Okay, so when I get to the second round, I am going to work a gray stitch and 3 purple stitches, and a gray stitch and 3 purple stitches. Then come back and repeat gray stitch, purple stitches, gray stitch, purple stitches, and I will repeat that 7 times for 56 stitches. And I will keep working round by round until I get 15 rounds completed. So we're going to move this a little bit up out of the way so we can see those first 2 rounds. And I now have my 16-inch needle with my 56 stitches on them, and I am going to join to work in the round. So this is my needle here, and you will notice that all my bumps at the bottom of the stitches are all on the inside of the needle here. You want to make sure that that's the case. You want to make sure that your stitches aren't twisted like this. You want to make sure that that band of bumps at the bottom of the needle, or I guess they're top here, but this band of bumps is all on the same side and not twisted. So you are going to pick up the edge of your needle that has the working yarn attached to it. The working yarn is the yarn that's attached to the ball. So you're going to want to pick up in your right hand the needle with the working yarn on it, and pick up in the left hand the needle that doesn't have that. Now check it again and make sure that all the bumps on the inside of the needle are not twisted, that they're all facing each other. And go ahead and pick up your working yarn, and you're going to want to put it towards the back, because the first stitch we're going to make is a knit stitch. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to knit this first stitch, and that is how we are joined to work in the round. It's not more complicated than that at all. If you would like to, at this point, you can get a locking stitch marker, and you can go ahead and put it right before that stitch you just made. There we go. And that's going to designate the beginning of your round. So as I said, this first round this is my main color. I'm using my dark blue as my main color here. This is a full round of just the main color. And I'm going to work my way around this needle until I get back to this marker. And that will be the end of my first round. So I'm going to do that because there's really nothing fancy about it at all. And I will join you back here in a minute at my marker, and we'll add the new color. Be right back. I'm back, So we are now at the point where I have finished the round of plain main color on row 1, and I'm ready to start round 2. Now round 2 says knit 1 light, knit 3 dark, knit 1 light, knit 3 dark. So here I am at the beginning of the round, and I'm going to now add the contrasting color yarn. So the way I set things up to make it easier for me is I will put my main color on the right hand side, and I will put my contrasting color on the left hand side. And that will keep these from really twisting around each other and make them be coming kind of from the right direction. So we're going to start with one contrasting color, one light. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to put my right hand needle into the first stitch and get ready to knit. And then I'm going to pick up the end of my contrasting color, and I want to leave a tail because I'm going to want to weave this in later to make it kind of neat in the back. So I'm going to drape the new color yarn over my back needle, my needle in the back here, and I'm going to pinch it just so I can pull it through and make that first stitch with the new color. So just double check and make sure that you have enough of a tail left here, and you can pull it a little bit more to make a longer tail, or you can pull it a little shorter if you want to make it a little shorter. But make sure you've got your tail back there, and then you are going to work with this contrasting color yarn in your left hand now. So you can just hold this over here in your left hand to start with. I normally wrap my yarn around my pinky and under my index finger, but however you can hold this yarn so that it's comfortable for you is what's most important. So the next 3 stitches are the main color stitches, my dark stitches, and there are 3 of them. So I'm going to take the yarn now, and it's going to strand behind the light color yarn, which is why this is called stranded knitting, and I'm going to knit 1, 2, 3 in the dark color. Now if you look around to the back, you will see, here's the back of the stitch. Let me get a little closer for you. This was my first stitch, the light colored stitch, and you can see a strand of yarn in the back of it that went from this blue stitch to this dark blue stitch. Okay, so let's go back. Now it's time to do a light color again. And you can hold the dark color in your right hand. I normally wrap it around my pinky and hold it in my right hand. However is comfortable for you is fine. You're going to take the yarn in your left hand. You will insert the needle to knit, and then you will wrap the light yarn around and pull it through. Now what's important here is that the light color yarn you will see is stranding in the back. This is called a float, and we want to keep the floats a little loose, because if you'll see, if I have my stitches squished together and I pull that tight, it's going to make my knitting tight. It's going to make it so that it kind of puckers up and it doesn't stretch well. And so we want to avoid that. And the way we avoid that is, I will show you, okay? So we just did a light color, and now I'm going to do the dark color, and I'm going to go ahead and knit 3 with my right hand, and you'll see how it strands across that one stitch, and it's pretty loose back there. That's that one stitch. You don't want to pull really, really tight, but you don't really have to go out of your way, I think, to make that one loose. It just kind of naturally happens. So I'm going to do that 3 times. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place a marker because I finished an 8-stitch repeat. So when I reach a marker, in this case on this row, I'm putting a marker every 8 stitches. And I'm going to put a different color because I like to have my beginning of round color be different than my other colors. So when you finish every 8 stitches, you just want to take a second and make sure that you got the pattern right. And I did. It's light, dark, 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 light, dark, dark, dark. Okay, so we're going to go and do a light again. So one way to make sure that you have a loose float in the back is to make sure before you put your needle in to knit this light stitch that these previous stitches on the right hand needle are spread out. So that makes it so that when you bring this light colored yarn around the back, since these are spread out, it's going to make that float in the back longer and looser. If you have these stitches all bunched up before you knit the new stitch, you would have it be too tight. So I get into a kind of a cadence where I will do, this is my dark, dark, dark. I do these 3 stitches in a row, and then I stop and I spread those stitches out, and I go to work the next stitch with the light colored yarn, and that gives a big long spread for that float in the back. And then I will take the dark colored yarn again and work 3 stitches. Whoops. Okay, so I'm going to get another marker. Excuse me. Get another marker here. And I'm going to check, and I did light, dark, 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 light, dark, dark, dark. And there's my next marker. So I'm going to continue going around. I am going to, there's my light color. And you can see with my left-hand needle, the yarn in my left-hand needle, you can pick the yarn up and you can wrap it around your needle. That's one way of doing it. If you can train yourself to keep the yarn on your index finger back here, then when you go to knit that stitch, you can just pick it up off your back finger and it's wrapped around there. That's actually continental knitting, knitting with your left hand. So you've got the knitting part down once you learn to do this. So again, I'm going to go ahead and do 3 darks. And then I'm going to do a light, but I spread my stitches, and then I go to knit, and I'm scraping that yarn off my finger in the back, and then I am going to work 3 more darks. And I will place another marker. And I will check to make sure that I did the stitches correctly. When you're doing, actually I jumped ahead. I now have 9 stitches, so I have a light, light, dark, 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 light, dark, 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 light. I need to put my marker in because I want to do them every 8. So I'll go ahead and just slip that marker on there. And I've already started the next set of repeats. Excuse me. So I'm going to keep doing that all the way around. And that will be my first round. And then I'm going to join you back here again, and we're going to start the second round, and I'll give you a couple of hints and tips on that. So I will be right back. Hi, I'm back. So I finished the first round of the hat. And if we look at our chart, I'll get that back again. I finished this round 2 with light, dark, 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 light, dark, dark, dark. So one thing I'd like you to do is, if you look at the back of your work, and when you're a beginner, when this is the first time you're doing it, it's a good idea to maybe every row, or at least occasionally, check to make sure that your floats are loose in the back. And these look good. There's a little bit of room in them. This is going to give them a chance to be able to stretch some over your head. And those look fine. So let me show you an example of what it looks like on the finished hat, the inside. These are what the strands look like. So you want to make sure that your strands are nice and even, that they can stretch some. You want to make sure that on the front of your work that the work isn't puckering and pulling close. So if you just check every round, just look at the back and see how your floats are doing. That's kind of a good practice, especially as a beginner. Once you get more comfortable and confident with it, then you don't really need to check as much. One word about placement of your yarn and which hands you put it in. There is actually a difference in the stitches that you make with the yarn in your left hand and the stitches that you make with the yarn in your right hand, and it has to do with how the yarns drape across each other in the back. It turns out that the yarn that you have in your left hand actually has a little bit more yarn in it because of the way it strands behind the darker yarn, and that causes that lighter color to pop more. If you were to switch and do the contrasting color in your left and the main color in, or the contrasting color in your right and the main color in your left, those stitches for the light color in that case would kind of recede. And so it's the yarn in your left hand that actually kind of pops out and comes to the surface. So when you're reading about patterns and stuff, they'll often talk about the background color. So if you'll look at my hat here, you kind of think of the background color up here. It's the color that's going on in the back. That background color stays in your right hand. And then the lighter color in this case, they call that the dominant color. And it's the one that sort of pops at you to the front. And that's what makes the diamonds and the lines. And so before you do a project, you decide which color you want to really kind of pop at you and be the dominant color, and that goes on the left. And your background color will go to your right hand. What's really important more than anything is that you maintain that throughout. You don't want to be switching hands back and forth partially through this, because it could actually make a little kind of weirdness in the color as you go. So that's just a little tip there. Now when you come here and you're ready to start the third round, it's going to be 2 light, 1 dark, 3 light, 1 dark, 1 light. And one thing to notice here is this is an 8-stitch repeat. But you'll notice if you have 1 on the left and 2 on the right, that actually makes 3 light stitches together. So overall, if you're not looking at like the 8-stitch separation, the pattern is really light 3, dark 1, light 3, dark 1, light 3. But if you're following the chart, of course, it's light 2, dark 1, light 3, dark 1, light 1 within those 8 stitches. Okay, so we're going to do that. I'll start you on that. You're going to have a little bit of a jog or a transition as you join in the round, and that's a normal thing, nothing to worry about. It says here that we're starting with 2 lights. So I'm going to get my light yarn in my left hand, And I'm going to get my dark yarn in my right hand, excuse me, while I flip these a little bit. Okay, left hand light, right hand dark, as I have been doing because I want to stay consistent. We just talked about that. This first stitch on the third row is going to be a little loose because you actually have your tail back here where you joined it. So you'll go ahead and you'll work that first stitch in the light color and then go ahead and pull your tail to make it just a little tighter. And then the second stitch is going to be a light stitch. Now if you're having trouble managing your hands, maybe wrapping them around your fingers or really getting your hands around it, you can drop your yarn between stitches and pick up and work the next stitch. So for instance, I'm now doing one blue stitch. I can pick up this stitch in my right hand and wrap, and I can drop it. I can pick up in my left hand the light stitch, and I'm going to do 3. 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to go ahead and get my dark yarn again and do 1. And then I will pick up my light yarn again and do white. If the whole right hand, left hand thing is too hard for you to manage, and I will encourage you to try to practice. This swatch is your chance to get comfortable. So take advantage of it. Try to work using your right hand and your left hand if you can. If you're completely just it's so not working for you, you can do a method where you do, my first stitch here is a light color. You can pick the light color up in your right hand and knit 2. And you can drop it. Pick up the one in your right hand and do 1 stitch and drop it. And then do the yarn, pick up the yarn in your right hand, the light yarn, and do 3 stitches. And in this case, again, don't forget that you're going to be stranding your dark color in the back of these 3 stitches. So you want to make sure that you spread the 3 stitches before you pick up the dark color and knit that stitch. So this is basically how you're going to go. When you get to the stitch marker, you just slip the stitch marker and then start again here at the beginning of round 3 and knit 2 light stitches. So it's helpful if, as you're using the chart, that you get an index card or a sticky or something to let you know where you are on the chart. So I'm working on round 3 right now, so I will have my index card like this, and I block out what's coming. But one thing you can notice as you're working across row 3 is when I work this first stitch here, I'm working it into a light color stitch on the row before. See how I worked the first stitch and then that's the light color stitch from the row before. And then you can see the next stitch is a light color stitch, but it's worked into a dark one before. So this kind of helps you see if you are in the right place. So the next one is a dark stitch into a dark stitch. So I'm knitting into a dark stitch here and I make a dark stitch. And then the next one is a light stitch that I'm making into a dark stitch. See how you can do that? So that's a way to kind of keep track and make sure you have the pattern right also. So we're going to keep doing this and we're going to keep following the rounds until we get to round 15. When we finish round 15, we are going to bind off. And we are going to end up having a swatch that looks like this. you are going to want to put this swatch in cold water, and if you like to use some kind of wool wash like Eucalyptus or some other brand, you could put that in there too. Go ahead and soak this in cold water. Let it soak for about a half an hour. Then you're going to lift it out of the sink, squish the water out. Don't rub, don't grind, don't agitate, just squish the water out. Then you're going to want to lay this down on a towel and roll it up and get as much moisture out of it as you can. And then you can either lay this flat to dry, and that means about halfway through the drying time, like I would say, at least 8 hours later, you'll need to flip it. The other thing that you might want to do is find some sort of cylindrical pot, or like pottery. I've put this on pottery before, or on a kitchen pot. You don't want to stretch it when it's wet. You don't want it looking like this, okay? You want it to, while it's drying, to maintain these really nice stitches next to one another. Don't stretch the heck out of it, okay? And you'll just want to drape it over something or lay it flat to dry for probably 24 hours. After you do that, then you are going to measure, and that is going to be our next video. So please tune in for that, and you can find out how to measure for gauge for this project. We'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.